"25 years ago, I went to former Yugoslavia, where I spent several years working as a journalist, witnessing firsthand the effects of the devastation that was caused by that country being torn apart by nationalism and hate. And that nationalism had been fueled by propaganda in the media for decades before the war. This is just one of the reasons why I believe it's vitally important that we remain a part of the European Union and work together with our neighbours to ensure that peace in this continent continues. The Brexit stalemate in Parliament has shown that our democracy is completely broken. The Brexit policies of both our main parties have now divided this country in two. The Conservatives' deal pleases no one. Labour's Brexit deal will be just as bad. So we have a fundamental choice to make. What kind of Europe, what kind of Britain do we want to live in? Both Britain and the EU are threatened by the rise of anti-liberal forces, and I want us to work in partnership with other liberal parties from across Europe towards our vision of a free, peaceful, democratic, united Europe. I want us to be part of that European Union, in the room, at the table, making good decisions, being a rule maker, not a rule taker. That is why I believe we have to remain in the European Union, and every vote for the Liberal Democrats in this election is a vote to stop Brexit. I think that the result we had in the referendum in 2016 was a result of an awful lot of people feeling very disenfranchised by a political system, the Westminster bubble, people feeling ignored, people feeling that those people in London had no idea of what life is really like in other parts of the country. And, you know, people who are working 40 hours a week, earning a full-time salary, still can't afford to pay the bills, and you know, people who are relying on food banks, all that kind of thing, a real entrenched feeling of inequality, growing inequality and disenfranchisement. And the Liberal Democrats have been calling forever for a change in our voting system, proportional representation, so that when you vote in an election, your vote will really count. And I think the referendum was the first vote in a very long time, generations, where people felt that they could actually go and make their voices heard at the ballot box, and that's what they did. And we need to have a system where votes in general elections mean more than they do. There are so many people in this country who know that their vote is just a wasted vote because they're going to get a Tory MP or they're going to get a Labour MP, and it doesn't matter how they vote. And I think that is just one example of why we need a change, so that people will feel they have got more input into the representatives they get in Parliament, and those representatives by turn will have to work harder for their votes, because they will know that they are more answerable to the people they represent in Westminster. Okay. I'm hoping to go to Brussels, and I'm hoping that I'll be there for 5 years, because like And one thing I can promise you is, if I'm elected, I will go to Brussels every week and I will do the job, and I won't just take the salary and knock the EU. I spent a long time as a journalist before coming into this. One of the things I would really like to do if I got to Brussels is to use those skills to try and educate people back here about what MEPs actually do in Brussels, and what the work involves, and what the job involves, and why it's important that we're there, and why we want to be there doing that job. Because I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding in Britain about what the benefits we get from being in the EU. So that's one of the things I would like to bring to the table, to try and educate our younger people and educate people generally here about what does an MEP do, because I bet most people in this room really doesn't know what an MEP does week to week. So that's one of the things I would like to do. So I think the answer to this question could get quite repetitive, but it's interesting that Jim talked about showing leadership in Europe on climate change, because during the coalition years, the energy minister was a Liberal Democrat, Ed Davey, and he worked tirelessly in Europe to make sure that Europe pushed tougher emissions targets for the Paris Climate Treaty, and he showed great leadership in Europe on climate issues. When the coalition ended, the Conservatives ended funding for the Green Deal, they scrapped subsidies for renewables, they sold the Green Investment Bank, they ended tax breaks for clean cars, they abolished the rules on zero carbon homes, and I could go on, that's not the end of the list. This government is not concerned about climate change, it has never been a priority, and I think for the sake of our planet, I would like to see, first of all, a change in government, and then I think that the only thing we should prioritise is the climate change fight, because if we don't get that right, then everything else is irrelevant, frankly, and we can only do that in the European Union with our European friends and allies, because climate change, the climate crisis, does not stop at national borders. We have to do it together. Well, like Jim, I think many people voted in 2016 out of anger and frustration, and like I've already said, I think people wanted Westminster to sit up and listen to things that were going wrong in their communities. But these are things that are not the fault of the European Union, and it is up to our political leaders, and by this I mean all the MPs in Westminster, particularly Labour MPs, to say to their constituents that they are the ones that are going to suffer if Brexit goes ahead. It is the many, not the few, that are going to suffer if Brexit goes ahead. It is the few people, the wealthy elite, who are going to do well out of Brexit. And the Brexit leaders who've already shifted their money abroad, they're going to be fine. But I've seen a statistic. $99,159 jobs have already been lost since the Brexit referendum, and it's only going to get worse. Businesses in this area, the aerospace industry, the financial services, they're all going to be hit. People that you know are going to lose their jobs because of Brexit. And just one last thing, it was a very small majority, and you cannot and should not and must not ignore 16.1 million people who voted to stay in the European Union. So I also read this report, and one of the things that struck me in the report was that we now have chief executives in this country who are being paid 145 times the salary of the lowest paid worker in their businesses. Now, to me, I don't know how anybody could justify paying themselves 145 times what the lowest paid worker in their company gets paid, because in most businesses, everybody is important, from the cleaner to the receptionist, to the person packing the parcels, to the person sending them out, to the customer services person on the phone, whatever it is you're making or selling, all these people contribute to a successful business. And I think that is absolutely abhorrent. But in terms of policies, education is absolutely fundamental to the Liberal Democrats, which is why we introduced the pupil premium, which gives money to all children from disadvantaged backgrounds in every school across the country to try and give them a fair start in education. I think universal credit is an absolute outrage, and the fact that the Conservatives removed so much money from universal credit after the 2015 election has meant that people have had, 5, 6, 7 week wait before they get any benefits at all, and that absolutely has to change, and it ought to change tomorrow. It's a shame on our country. And mental health, I think we need a massive investment in mental health so that people with mental health problems can get seen right at the beginning when they're showing the first signs of a problem. So when there's the first signs of a bit of depression or anxiety, they can get some help, rather than waiting until they're suicidal to be able to get help on the NHS.
Thank you.
Well, I think one thing that needs to be said is that we have punched above our weight in the EU for decades. We've had more representatives than we should have had. The number of MEPs is divided by, each country has a certain number of MEPs, and we have had more than our fair share. We've had more say in nominating commissioners, and therefore more influence over European legislation. And just coming back on something that Anne said earlier about legislation and laws, it's probably worth noting that the British government has voted against EU laws that are being decided on. Only 2% of the laws that have been agreed since 1999 are laws that we voted against, if that makes sense. So we only lost 2% of the legislation. 95% of the legislation made by the European Union was legislation that we wanted. We were on the winning side, we were in favour of. So this whole idea about them imposing laws on us that we didn't want is absolute nonsense. So, as for securing peace, well, I've already talked about my time in the Balkans. I think we need to be in the European Union as part of this peace project, which has lasted for 70 years. It brought our continent together. That is why the European Union exists. France and Germany wanted to ensure that there would never be another war like the war we had seen that ended in 1945. And part of the work I would like to do is working with Balkan countries on the EU expansion to the east to carry on securing that
Caroline,
peace.
I've got to stop you there.
Okay, yes, absolutely the EU should be taking more of a lead. And the reason I say that is because I don't believe national governments, particularly the government we have here at the moment, are interested in setting the targets that we need and taking it seriously. For example, the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, I don't know if you're aware of that, was a massive project in Swansea to get power, wave power going, and it was a new innovative project. It was going to be quite expensive, but the reason we need to invest in these sorts of projects and this sort of technology is because it's an early technology and we need to invest in it so we can learn and it can grow and it becomes cheaper and it becomes more efficient, and as the years go by we get better and better and better at it, like we have with wind power, and we must be doing that now. We can't afford to just put it on the back burner and say it's too expensive. And also, since the 2016 referendum, you may be aware that Donald Trump was elected in the United States 6 months later, and Donald Trump does not believe in climate change. Now, one of the reasons the EU has to be strong on this is because they have to influence countries like America and China, and only in a bloc of 500 million people like the EU will we have the strength to put pressure on countries like America to actually do their part as well, because it's their planet too. Vote Liberal Democrat on May the 23rd to stop Brexit.